For 3 years, my relationship with Adam had been steady and predictable, like a well-oiled machine. We moved in sync, knew each other's routines, and could anticipate each other's needs without speaking a word. To anyone on the outside looking in, we were the perfect couple. At first, I reveled in the stability. After years of chaotic dating experiences, being with Adam felt like coming home. He was kind, attentive, and dependable, the kind of partner my friends said I was lucky to have. And I was. But as the months turned into years, I began to notice a nagging feeling creeping in. It wasn't unhappiness, exactly, but more of a restlessness I couldn't quite put into words. At first, I ignored it. I threw myself into work, hobbies, and nights out with friends, hoping the feeling would fade. But it didn't. I started to realize how much of myself I'd set aside for the sake of our relationship. Little things, like the weekly book club I'd stopped attending because Adam didn't care for literary fiction, or the spontaneous weekend trips I'd once loved but no longer took because he preferred planning everything to the last detail. It wasn't that Adam asked me to give these things up. I'd done it willingly, thinking that was what a good partner did. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost pieces of myself, and I wasn't sure how to get them back. One Friday night, my best friend Emma dragged me to a party. It was a gathering of artists and musicians, a vibrant, chaotic energy crackling in the air. At first, I felt out of place, like an observer watching life happen to other people. That's when I met him. His name was Lucas, and from the moment we started talking, I felt an electric pull I couldn't ignore. He had an ease about him, a confidence that wasn't overbearing but magnetic. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, our favorite books, dreams we'd shelved, and places we wanted to see. "Why did you stop traveling?" he asked at one point, his brow furrowed in genuine curiosity. "I guess life got in the way," I said, shrugging. "Or maybe you let it," he replied, his gaze steady. His words hit me like a jolt, forcing me to confront something I'd been avoiding, how much I'd sacrificed my own desires for the sake of keeping the peace in my relationship. As the night wore on, the connection between Lucas and me deepened. It wasn't just physical, though the chemistry was undeniable. It was the way he saw me, the parts of myself I'd forgotten, the dreams I'd put on hold. When the party ended, we stood outside, the city lights casting a soft glow. "This feels different," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It does," he agreed. Nothing happened between us that night, no dramatic kiss, no crossing of boundaries. But the emotional impact of our connection lingered, leaving me questioning everything. The next morning, I woke up feeling both exhilarated and guilty. Adam had no idea about the party or Lucas, and I wasn't sure how to explain the shift I felt inside. Over breakfast, he chatted about his plans for the day, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my mind. "You're quiet," he said, giving me a concerned look. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. But the truth was, everything felt far from okay. Over the following weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about Lucas and the way he'd challenged me to examine my life. It wasn't that I wanted to leave Adam, I still loved him deeply. But I couldn't ignore the realization that I'd been limiting myself for the sake of our relationship. I started to wonder, could I find a way to reclaim my independence without sacrificing what Adam and I had built? Or were stability and freedom inherently at odds? Eventually, the weight of my thoughts became too much to bear. One evening, as Adam and I sat on the couch watching a movie, I turned to him and said, "Can we talk?" He muted the TV, his expression serious. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Do you ever feel like we've settled into a routine? Like we're just coasting?" He frowned, clearly taken aback. "I thought that's what we wanted, a comfortable life together." "I do," I said quickly. "But I also feel like I've lost pieces of myself along the way. And I don't know how to get them back." Adam listened carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. "I didn't realize you felt that way," he said finally. But I want to help. What can we do to fix this? His willingness to work on things softened the guilt I felt, but it also made me realize how much of this journey I needed to take on my own. I think I need some time, I said gently. Not to pull away from us, but to figure out who I am outside of this relationship. Adam nodded, though I could see the hurt in his eyes. Okay, he said. If that's what you need, I'll support you. With Adam's understanding, I started to make small changes. I rejoined my book club, planned a solo weekend trip, and even started journaling again, a practice I'd abandoned years ago. Each step felt like a reclamation of the person I used to be, but it also brought new questions. Could I fully embrace my independence without jeopardizing the stability I'd come to rely on? And what role, if any, did Lucas play in this new chapter of my life? After my conversation with Adam, life felt both lighter and more complicated. His willingness to support my journey toward rediscovery was a relief, but it also underscored the depth of the love we shared. And yet, there was no denying the tension that had begun to creep into our relationship, a subtle but unmistakable shift in the way we moved through our days. Adam wasn't controlling or dismissive, but I could tell he struggled with my need for independence. His questions, though always kind, hinted at his uncertainty. How was book club, or, what made you decide to book the cabin for yourself, were laced with an undertone of, where does this leave us? My weekend trip to the cabin was a turning point. It was the first time I'd done something entirely for myself in years, and the solitude felt like both a challenge and a gift. I spent the mornings hiking through dense woods, the afternoons sketching by the lake, and the evenings curled up by the fire with a book. For the first time in years, I felt entirely present, no obligations, no expectations, just me. As I journaled one night, the words poured out in a torrent. I love Adam, but I've forgotten how to love myself. How do I find a balance? Can I reclaim my independence without losing the life we've built together? Despite my best efforts to focus on myself and my relationship with Adam, thoughts of Lucas lingered. It wasn't just him, it was what he represented. Our connection had been a spark in the darkness, a reminder of the passion and spontaneity I'd let slip away. One evening, as I scrolled through my phone, I noticed his name among my messages. I hadn't reached out since the party, but the temptation was there, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours before finally setting the phone down. Whatever Lucas had awakened in me, it wasn't his responsibility to resolve. That was my journey to navigate. In an effort to reconnect with Adam, I planned a date night, something spontaneous and fun, like we used to do when we first started dating. I surprised him with tickets to an outdoor concert, packing a picnic and a blanket for us to share under the stars. As the music played, we leaned into each other, laughing and singing along. For a few hours, it felt like nothing had changed, like we were the same carefree couple we'd been at the beginning. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing, not from Adam, but from myself. Back at home, as Adam slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The questions I'd been avoiding pressed down on me, demanding answers. Could I truly be myself in this relationship? Was it possible to balance love and independence, or was one always sacrificed for the other? And what role did Lucas play in all of this? I knew I needed clarity, but finding it felt like trying to grasp smoke. A few weeks later, I ran into Lucas at a bookstore. The sight of him took my breath away, not because of his looks but because of the memories he stirred. "Caroline," he said, his smile warm but cautious. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Me neither," I replied, my voice wavering. We ended up grabbing coffee, and as we sat across from each other, I felt a mix of excitement and guilt. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone genuine. "Figuring things out," I admitted. "It's been complicated." He nodded, as if he understood. Sometimes the hardest questions are the ones worth asking. As our conversation continued, I realized how easy it would be to let myself fall into Lucas's orbit. He was charming, insightful, and undeniably magnetic. But I also knew that pursuing anything with him would only complicate things further, not just for Adam, but for me. When we parted ways, I made a silent promise to myself: whatever path I chose, it had to come from a place of clarity and integrity. That evening, I sat Adam down for another heart-to-heart. "I ran into someone today," I began, choosing my words carefully. "Someone who's made me question a lot about myself and what I want." Adam's expression darkened, but he didn't interrupt. "I need you to know that I haven't done anything to betray your trust," I continued. "But this encounter made me realize how much I've been struggling with my own identity, and how much I've let that affect us." "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. "I think I need to take some space," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "Not because I don't love you, but because I need to figure out who I am outside of this relationship." Adam took the news as well as I could have hoped, but it was still painful. "I don't want to lose you," he said, his voice breaking. "But I also want you to be happy. If this is what you need, I'll support it." Hearing his words only deepened my guilt, but I knew this was a decision I had to make for myself. As I packed a bag and prepared to stay with Emma for a while, I felt a mix of fear and relief. I didn't know what the future held, for me, for Adam, or for the life we'd built together. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was taking a step towards something real, something true. Moving out of the apartment I shared with Adam was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made. As I packed my things and loaded them into my car, I couldn't help but think about everything we'd built together: the shared laughs, the quiet mornings, the plans we'd made for a future I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. Emma welcomed me into her spare bedroom without hesitation, giving me the space I needed while also being a sounding board when I wanted to talk. "This isn't forever," she reminded me as I settled in. "You're not running away. You're taking time to figure things out." I nodded, grateful for her perspective. But no matter how much I tried to frame it as a step forward, it still felt like I was breaking something that couldn't be repaired. The first few weeks in Emma's apartment were a blur of emotions: relief, guilt, sadness, and the occasional spark of excitement at the possibility of rediscovery. To keep myself grounded, I created a routine. Mornings were for journaling, where I wrote down every messy, unfiltered thought. Afternoons were for work, which became a welcome distraction. And evenings were for exploring things I'd once loved but had let slip away: painting, long walks, and reading novels I'd always meant to get to but never had the time. One evening, as I sifted through an old box of belongings I'd brought from the apartment, I found a collection of photos Adam and I had taken during our first year together. We looked so happy, so carefree. Seeing those images brought a wave of nostalgia and a pang of guilt. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, sitting down beside me. "I'm thinking about how much I still love him," I admitted. "But also about how much I've changed." Emma nodded. "Love doesn't always mean staying the same. Sometimes it means growing, even if it's apart." It wasn't long before Lucas reached out. He'd heard through mutual friends that I was staying with Emma, and one afternoon, I received a text. "Hey. I hope you're doing okay. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Seeing his name on my screen stirred up a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to reply immediately, to seek comfort in the connection we'd shared. But another part of me hesitated, unsure if involving Lucas again was a step forward or a step back. In the end, I replied simply, "Thank you. I'll let you know." At Emma's urging, I started seeing a therapist, a calm, compassionate woman named Dr. Myers, who quickly became an anchor in my tumultuous journey. In our sessions, I unpacked everything: my love for Adam, my attraction to Lucas, my longing for independence, and the fear that I'd never truly find a balance between stability and freedom. "You're carrying a lot of guilt," Dr. Myers observed during one session. "But guilt isn't necessarily a bad thing. It means you care. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" Her words stayed with me, pushing me to confront the choices I'd made and the reasons behind them. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel more like myself, or perhaps, a new version of myself. I started attending a yoga class, where I found solace in the quiet focus of each pose. I joined a local book club, rediscovering the joy of losing myself in stories and connecting with others who shared my passions. I even took a weekend trip to the coast, just me and my thoughts. Sitting on the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. One afternoon, while picking up coffee at a local cafe, I ran into Adam. He looked different, lighter, somehow, but his smile was just as warm as I remembered. "Caroline," he said, his voice tinged with surprise. "Hi." "Hi," I replied, my heart racing. We ended up sitting down together, catching up on our lives. He told me about a new hobby he'd picked up, cycling, and I shared how I'd been exploring painting again. "I'm glad you're doing well," he said as we stood to leave. "I really mean that." "Me too," I replied, realizing that while I still loved him, I was finally at peace with the choices we'd made. Lucas remained a presence in the background of my mind, a what-if I couldn't quite shake. Eventually, I decided to meet him for coffee, needing clarity about what role he might play in my life. As we talked, I realized something important. While Lucas had been a catalyst for my self-discovery, he wasn't the solution to my questions. He'd awakened something in me, but the journey I was on was mine alone. "I'm grateful for what you've helped me see," I told him as we parted ways. "But I think I need to keep focusing on myself right now." He nodded, his expression understanding. "I get it. Take care of yourself, Caroline." With Lucas behind me and my relationship with Adam resolved, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years. My life was far from perfect, but it was real, and it was mine. As I sat on Emma's balcony one evening, watching the city lights twinkle, I felt a surge of gratitude, for the people who had supported me, for the lessons I'd learned, and for the strength I'd found within myself. With the chapter on Adam and Lucas behind me, life opened up in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was strange how freeing it felt, stepping out of the confines of my past and into a future that was entirely unwritten. For the first time in years, I was no longer defined by my relationship status or the expectations I'd placed on myself. I began to see my life as a canvas, blank and full of possibility. Each decision I made, no matter how small, felt like a brushstroke, slowly painting a picture that reflected who I truly was. One of the first things I did was find a place of my own. It wasn't much, just a tiny studio apartment with creaky floors and a view of a parking lot, but it was mine. Decorating the space became a project that felt both therapeutic and empowering. I filled it with plants, thrifted furniture, and pieces of art I'd created during my recent journey of self-discovery. Each item carried a story, a reminder of how far I'd come. During a particularly introspective evening, I revisited an old hobby, photography. Digging my camera out of a forgotten box, I decided to take it on a walk around the city. As I snapped photos of bustling streets, quiet alleys, and golden sunsets, I felt a familiar sense of joy bubbling up. Photography had always been a way for me to see the world differently, to find beauty in the mundane. I started sharing my photos online, and to my surprise, they resonated with others. Comments poured in from strangers who connected with the emotions I captured in my work. "You have a way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary," one message read. The feedback encouraged me to take things further. I signed up for a local photography contest and began working on a portfolio that showcased my growth, not just as an artist, but as a person. Through photography, I found a new community. I joined a group of like-minded creatives who met regularly to share their work, offer feedback, and plan projects. One of them, a woman named Clara, quickly became a close friend. She was bold and unapologetically herself, qualities I admired and aspired to embody. "Your photos tell a story," she said during one of our meetups. "You've been through something, and it shows, in the best way." Her words reminded me of how much I'd grown. As part of my journey, I also made an effort to reconnect with my family. Over the years, I'd drifted from them, caught up in the busyness of life and my own inner struggles. One weekend, I visited my parents for the first time in months. We spent hours talking, laughing, and reminiscing about old times. "You seem different," my mom said as we sat on the porch. "Happier, lighter." "I think I am," I admitted. The visit reminded me of the importance of roots, of staying connected to the people who had shaped me. One evening, as I sorted through my emails, I found a message that made my heart race. A local gallery had seen my photography online and wanted to feature my work in an upcoming exhibit. The news felt surreal. I'd always dreamed of sharing my art with others, but I never thought it would happen so soon. Preparing for the exhibit became my focus. I spent hours selecting and editing photos, creating pieces that told the story of my transformation. The night of the exhibit, the gallery buzzed with energy. Friends, strangers, and fellow artists wandered through the space, pausing to admire the photos displayed on the walls. As I stood there, watching people connect with my work, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about the art, it was about the journey it represented. One visitor, a woman in her 40s, approached me and said, "Your photos, they make me feel less alone." "Thank you." Her words were a reminder of the power of vulnerability, of sharing your truth with the world. During the exhibit, I met someone new, a man named Julian. He was a writer, and we struck up a conversation about the intersection of art and storytelling. There was an ease to our connection, a shared understanding that didn't feel rushed or forced. Over the weeks that followed, we began spending more time together, attending art events, exploring the city, and having long, meandering conversations about life. Julian wasn't a replacement for Adam or Lucas. He was something entirely different, a partner who valued independence as much as connection. As I reflected on the past year, I couldn't believe how much had changed. The woman I'd been, the one who felt trapped and unsure of herself, was unrecognizable compared to the person I was now. But I also knew that every version of myself deserved gratitude. Each step, no matter how difficult, had brought me closer to the life I was meant to live. With the exhibit behind me and new opportunities on the horizon, I felt excited about the future. There were still challenges to face, still lessons to learn, but I was ready for them. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. As Julian and I stood on a rooftop one evening, watching the city lights flicker below, he turned to me and said, "What's next for you?" I smiled, thinking about all the possibilities. "Whatever feels right," I replied. And for the first time, I truly believed it. Life had become a patchwork of new beginnings. Each piece of my day, from my photography to my growing community of creatives, felt like it belonged to a larger, more meaningful whole. I was no longer just surviving, I was thriving. Julian became a quiet but significant part of that tapestry. Our connection was easy and supportive, yet it didn't consume me. For the first time, I felt like I could be in a relationship without losing myself. But as life stabilized, a new set of challenges emerged, ones that tested my ability to hold on to the independence I'd fought so hard to reclaim. Following the success of my first exhibit, invitations began pouring in. There were offers to collaborate, commissions for private collections, and even a request to speak at a panel about women in the arts. The panel was a turning point. Public speaking had always been a fear of mine, but I knew this was an opportunity one couldn't pass up. As I stood on stage, sharing my journey with a room full of strangers, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. Each word was a testament to the struggles I'd faced and the strength I'd found. After the panel, a young woman approached me. "Your story gives me hope," she said, her voice trembling. "It makes me think I can start over too." Her words reminded me why I'd taken this leap in the first place. Julian and I grew closer with each passing month. He encouraged me to chase my dreams, often joining me on shoots or helping me brainstorm ideas for new projects. But as our relationship deepened, I felt an old fear creeping in, the worry that I might lose myself again. One evening, over dinner, I shared my concerns. "I don't want to fall into old patterns," I admitted. "I've worked so hard to find myself, and I'm scared of losing that." Julian reached across the table, taking my hand. "You don't have to choose between love and independence," he said. "We can figure this out together." His reassurance calmed my nerves, but I knew maintaining that balance would require conscious effort. Out of the blue, I received a call from Adam. His name on my phone screen brought a wave of mixed emotions, fondness, curiosity, and a twinge of guilt. "Hi, Caroline," he said when I answered. "I hope this isn't a bad time." "No, not at all," I replied, my voice steady. "How are you?" We talked for nearly an hour, catching up on life. He shared that he'd started dating someone new, and I could hear the happiness in his voice. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said as the conversation wound down. "For being honest, even when it was hard. It forced me to grow, and I'm in a better place because of it." His words filled me with a sense of closure. Feeling the need for reflection, I decided to take another trip to the coast. This time, Julian joined me. We spent our days exploring hidden beaches and our evenings sitting by the fire, talking about everything from our childhoods to our dreams for the future. On the last night, as the waves crashed against the shore, Julian said, "You've come so far, Caroline. Do you see it?" "I do," I said, smiling. Back in the city, life picked up speed. Balancing my growing career, my relationship with Julian, and my personal growth felt like juggling a dozen spinning plates. There were moments of doubt, days when I questioned whether I could handle it all. But each time, I reminded myself of how far I'd come and the strength I'd discovered along the way. One evening, as I sorted through old journals, I came across an entry I'd written during my time with Emma. "I don't know who I am anymore, but I'm determined to find out. Even if it means starting over." Reading those words brought tears to my eyes. I thought about the version of myself who had written them, scared, unsure, and desperate for change, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had taken the first step, and because of her, I was here. The future felt wide open, filled with possibilities I couldn't yet see. Whether it was through photography, writing, or simply living with intention, I knew I had the tools to navigate whatever came next. As Julian and I stood on the rooftop of his apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below, he asked, "What's your next adventure?" I smiled, thinking about all the paths I could take. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But I can't wait to find out." My journey wasn't about perfection or having all the answers. It was about learning to embrace the messy, beautiful process of growth. Every decision I'd made, every misstep, every leap of faith, had brought me closer to a life that felt truly mine. And as I stood there, surrounded by love, creativity, and endless possibility, I knew one thing for certain: I was finally home. As the seasons changed, so did my life. The foundation I'd spent so long rebuilding began to feel sturdy, no longer fragile or uncertain. Each day was a new opportunity to create, connect, and grow into the person I was becoming. Julian and I grew closer, but in a way that left room for both of us to breathe. We weren't trying to define each other or fit into a mold of what a relationship should be. Instead, we found joy in the little things, the long walks, shared meals, and quiet moments of understanding. But even as life settled into a rhythm, new challenges emerged, forcing me to confront what I truly wanted for my future. After months of hard work, I was invited to showcase my photography in an international art festival. The opportunity was a dream come true, a chance to share my work on a global stage and connect with artists from around the world. The preparation was exhilarating and nerve-wracking. I spent countless nights perfecting my portfolio, ensuring every piece told a cohesive story. Julian was my biggest cheerleader, helping me brainstorm titles and offering thoughtful feedback. "You've created something amazing," he said one night as we reviewed the final selection. "The world needs to see this." Hearing those words from him filled me with a sense of pride and validation. The festival meant traveling abroad for 3 months, something I'd never done in a relationship before. Julian was supportive, but I could sense his apprehension. "I'm going to miss you," he admitted one evening as we packed my suitcase together. "I'll miss you too," I said, my voice soft. "But this is something I need to do, for myself." He nodded, understanding but hesitant. "I know. And I'm proud of you." Arriving at the festival was like stepping into another universe. The city buzzed with creativity, every corner filled with artists, writers, and visionaries sharing their work and exchanging ideas. My exhibit received an overwhelming response. People from different backgrounds and cultures connected with my photos, sharing stories of how the pieces resonated with their own experiences. One visitor said, "Your work feels like a mirror, showing us parts of ourselves we didn't know we'd lost." Her words reminded me of why I'd started this journey in the first place. While the festival was a career highlight, being away from Julian proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. Time zone differences made communication sporadic, and I could sense the strain it placed on both of us. One evening, during a rare phone call, he said, "I'm so proud of you, Caroline. But I'd be lying if I said this wasn't hard." "I know," I replied, my voice heavy with emotion. "But I think this is important for us, for me to prove to myself that I can do this." His silence spoke volumes, but we both knew the distance was temporary. When I finally returned, Julian was waiting for me at the airport. His smile was warm but cautious, as if he wasn't sure how to bridge the gap the past few months had created. "I missed you," I said, wrapping my arms around him. "I missed you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. The adjustment back to normalcy wasn't immediate, but we took it one day at a time. We talked openly about our struggles and how we could support each other moving forward. As life returned to its usual rhythm, I began to feel a pull towards something bigger, a desire to expand my work beyond photography and explore other forms of storytelling. I started writing, pouring my thoughts and experiences into essays and short stories. The process felt like a natural extension of my art, a way to deepen the connections I was building with others. When I shared my writing with Julian, he said, "This feels like the next step for you. Don't be afraid to follow it." His encouragement gave me the confidence to submit my work to literary magazines and online platforms. One evening, as we sat on the porch of Julian's apartment, watching the sunset, he turned to me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said, his voice steady. "Me too," I replied, unsure of where the conversation was heading. "I love you, Caroline," he said, taking my hand. "And I don't want to hold you back, I want to be part of your journey. But only if it's what you want too." His words were a proposal of sorts, not a traditional one, but a promise to build a future together, whatever that might look like. "I love you too," I said, tears streaming down my face. "And I want to keep building this with you, one step at a time." As I reflected on everything that had led me to this moment, the heartbreak, the mistakes, the risks, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Every choice I'd made, even the ones that hurt, had brought me here. I thought about Adam and Lucas, about Emma and the countless others who had shaped my journey. Each of them had taught me something valuable, and I carried those lessons with me. The future felt expansive, filled with possibilities I couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. With Julian by my side and my art continuing to evolve, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be, on a path that was uniquely mine. Life is rarely about reaching a final destination. It's about the journey, the twists and turns, the mistakes and triumphs, and the courage to keep moving forward. As I sit here writing this, I'm reminded of how far I've come. The girl I was, the one who felt trapped and unsure, would hardly recognize the woman I've become. But I know she'd be proud. Here's to the journey, and to the beauty of becoming. The life I had built felt more grounded with each passing day, but it was also dynamic, always evolving. I'd learned that stability didn't have to mean stagnation, and growth didn't have to come at the expense of the people and things I loved. It was possible to have both, to be rooted and free, all at once. Julian and I found our rhythm again after my return from the art festival. It wasn't perfect, there were moments of miscommunication and adjustment, but we approached every challenge with honesty and a shared commitment to making it work. I was growing not just as an artist or a partner, but as a person. And for the first time, I felt like my life was truly mine. One evening, as I worked on a new series of photographs, an email popped up in my inbox. It was an invitation to apply for a multidisciplinary residency in New York City, a prestigious program that brought together artists, writers, and performers from around the world to collaborate and create. The idea of spending 6 months in such a vibrant, chaotic place both excited and terrified me. It was an opportunity to challenge myself in ways I hadn't before, but it would also mean leaving behind the life I'd worked so hard to build. When I told Julian about it, he listened carefully. "That sounds incredible," he said. "But how do you feel about it?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Part of me wants to go, but part of me is scared. What if it's too much? What if I lose everything I've built here?" Julian smiled, taking my hand. "You're not going to lose yourself, Caroline. If this feels right, you should do it. I'll be here when you get back." I decided to apply, and when I was accepted, it felt like a sign. Preparing for the move was bittersweet. I was thrilled about the opportunity, but I also worried about leaving Julian and my growing community behind. Arriving in New York was a whirlwind. The city buzzed with energy, its streets filled with people chasing their dreams. The residency program was just as intense, long days of collaboration, late nights of brainstorming, and a constant push to think bigger, dig deeper, and create more boldly. One of my collaborators, a dancer named Mia, became a close friend. She had an infectious enthusiasm and a way of seeing beauty in everything. "Art is just life," she told me one night as we sat on a rooftop overlooking the city. "It's messy, unpredictable, and breathtaking all at once." Her words stayed with me, shaping the way I approached my work. While the residency was fulfilling, being away from Julian was harder than I'd anticipated. We talked often, but video calls couldn't replace the comfort of his presence. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, I called him in tears. "I miss you," I said, my voice breaking. "I miss you too," he replied softly. "But I'm so proud of you, Caroline. You're doing something amazing." His support kept me going, reminding me that love didn't always have to mean being in the same place. During the residency, I worked on a project that combined photography and storytelling, a series of portraits paired with written pieces that explored themes of identity, resilience, and transformation. The project forced me to confront parts of my own story I hadn't fully processed, my mistakes, my doubts, and the moments when I'd questioned my worth. Sharing the final pieces with the residency group was one of the most vulnerable things I'd ever done. But the response was overwhelming. "You've captured something universal," one of the mentors told me. "Your work doesn't just tell your story, it tells all of ours." When the residency ended, I returned home feeling both exhausted and invigorated. Julian was waiting for me at the airport, his smile as warm and steady as ever. "I'm so proud of you," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. Rebuilding our rhythm took time, but the distance had deepened our appreciation for each other. We were stronger, more intentional, and more connected than ever before. The experiences I'd gained during the residency reshaped the way I approached my art, and my life. I started hosting workshops to teach others how to use creative expression as a tool for healing and self-discovery. The workshops quickly grew in popularity, attracting people from all walks of life who wanted to explore their stories through art. One participant, a woman named Rachel, approached me after a session. "Your story gave me the courage to start again," she said. "Thank you for showing us that it's never too late to find yourself." Her words reminded me of the ripple effect of authenticity, how sharing your truth could inspire others to do the same. As I reflected on the past few years, I marveled at how far I'd come. The girl who once felt lost and trapped had grown into a woman who embraced the unknown with open arms. I thought about the people who had shaped my journey, Adam, Lucas, Emma, Julian, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Each of them had played a role in helping me become who I was, and I carried their lessons with me. The future felt like an open road, filled with endless possibilities. I didn't know exactly where it would lead, but I was no longer afraid. As Julian and I sat on the porch one evening, watching the stars, he said, "What's next for you?" I smiled, feeling the weightlessness of freedom. "Anything," I replied. And for the first time, I truly believed it. My story isn't about perfection or having all the answers. It's about the courage to grow, the resilience to keep going, and the beauty of embracing the journey. As I sit here, writing these words, I'm filled with gratitude, for the struggles, the triumphs, and every step that brought me here. Life is messy, unpredictable, and breathtaking all at once. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Here's to the journey, and to becoming.